"You're just a guest here, Dorothy," Vanessa said. I smoothed the dish towel and kept my voice even. Guests do not hold house keys, bank files, and a will page with their name. If this line hits home, like and share, subscribe, and tell me where you are from. My name is Dorothy Keene, and I am 63 years old. I live in a quiet neighborhood outside Raleigh, North Carolina, in the house my husband and I bought nearly 30 years ago. It has white shutters, a magnolia tree out front, and a porch swing that creaks like it remembers every story we told on it. When my husband, Robert, passed away 2 years ago, I told myself that keeping this house alive would be my way of keeping him near. My son, Paul, asked me to move in with him and his wife, Vanessa, soon after. He said it would make things easier for all of us, and I believed him. I packed only what mattered: a few books, the framed photograph of Robert in his fishing hat, and the old cedar chest where we kept our family papers. At first, living with them felt almost comforting. Vanessa had an easy laugh then, and she called me Mom the way she did before the wedding. She liked to cook, and I would help her chop vegetables while Paul came home late from the hospital where he worked as a physician's assistant. Their little boy, Ethan, was only 4 and liked to climb onto my lap with his toy cars. I told myself that Robert would have smiled seeing his grandson call me Grandma. I wanted to be useful, not a burden, so I handled the laundry, made breakfast, and paid for groceries from the small pension Robert left me. Those first weeks passed with small kindnesses. Vanessa left notes on the counter, saying, "Thank you." Paul brought home flowers for all 3 of us. I remember thinking how lucky I was that my son had chosen a woman who valued family. I was careful not to take up space. I kept my boxes in one corner of the guest room and my shoes by the door. I thought consideration was love expressed in quiet ways. But homes shift after grief. When spring came, the mood began to thin around the edges. Vanessa started reorganizing everything: the kitchen shelves, the living room furniture, even my small space in the pantry. "I'm just making room," she said, smiling, but her tone had a new edge. Paul worked longer hours, and I often ate dinner alone with Ethan. I tried not to notice when Vanessa stopped calling me Mom and began saying Dorothy in a way that sounded like a full stop. I still loved the rhythm of that house, the sound of the washer, the soft thud of Ethan's running feet, the hum of the refrigerator at night. Sometimes, I'd sit with my tea and write in a small notebook I kept by the window. I'd note the date, what flowers had bloomed, what Vanessa had said about redecorating. It wasn't suspicion then, just habit from years of keeping the library's records precise. But later, those notes would matter more than I ever imagined. Every Sunday, I visited Robert's grave. I told him that our son was doing fine, that Ethan had his eyes, and that Vanessa was strong-willed but caring. I believed that last part then. I kept faith in the idea that families find balance when they start with love. I was wrong, but not about love itself, only about what people sometimes do when fear hides behind pride. If you've ever tried to hold peace in a house that no longer feels like home, you'll understand why I stayed calm. I told myself storms settle when one person stays steady. I didn't yet know that steadiness would be tested by a single sentence I'd never forget. It began with small things, the kind of details only someone raised to notice order would see. A folded blanket moved from the couch, my mail tucked into a different drawer, the sound of hushed voices ending when I walked into the room. At first, I thought it was my own sensitivity. Grief can play strange tricks. I told myself to be grateful, to stay out of their way. Then one evening, about 3 months after I'd moved in, I heard Vanessa in the kitchen on the phone. Her tone was low but sharp. "I feel like a guest in my own house," she said, and then laughed softly. There was a pause, and she added, "She means well, but this isn't a retirement home." I froze in the hallway, unsure whether to leave or make a noise. My hands trembled, not with anger, but with recognition. That laugh, light, practiced, sounded nothing like the one from our first family dinners. I went to my room quietly that night. I took out the photograph of Robert that always sat on the dresser and looked at his eyes, wondering what he'd say if he were still here. Probably something patient. Give it time. People show their hearts when they're tired. So, I gave it time. I kept cooking breakfast, folding laundry, reading to Ethan at bedtime. Yet something had shifted in the house's air. Vanessa's voice carried a new authority, like she was rehearsing ownership. She started calling Paul's and her bedroom our wing. One afternoon, she moved my framed photo from the hallway wall, saying, "It clashes with the new decor." Then, one Friday evening, it happened. Paul was working late, and I was setting the table for dinner. Vanessa stood by the counter, arms crossed, eyes fixed on me. "Dorothy," she said. I think it's time we set some boundaries. You've been helpful, but this is our home. You're just a guest here. Her words didn't echo, they landed flat, almost ordinary. I remember the smell of roasted chicken, the sound of Ethan's cartoon on low volume. I set the fork down carefully. A guest, I repeated, as if testing the shape of it. Yes, she said. Guests don't make household decisions. I didn't argue. I simply nodded, picked up the towel, and dried my hands. I understand, I told her. My voice was calm, so calm that she looked momentarily uncertain. I think she expected protest, maybe tears. Instead, I asked, would you like me to finish setting the table? She blinked, said nothing, and went upstairs. That night, I sat by the window with my tea, staring at the faint reflection of my own face. I thought of the months since Robert's death, the careful way I'd folded myself into this family's rhythm, never asking for anything but kindness. I wasn't sure what hurt more, the sentence itself or how easily it was said. The next morning, Paul noticed the tension. Mom, did something happen? He asked as we packed Ethan's lunch. I smiled. Just a little misunderstanding. Nothing you need to worry about. He nodded, relieved, because men like Paul often want peace more than truth. I understood that too. But I began to pay attention differently. Numbers helped me think. 3 months since I'd moved in, one shared bank account for groceries and utilities, which I'd been funding steadily. 2 rooms where my things had been reduced to 1. I wrote these down in my notebook, not as evidence yet, only as clarity. I had learned long ago that clarity saves you when emotion tries to drown you. A week later, I found my checkbook moved from the desk drawer to the kitchen counter. Vanessa smiled when I asked. Oh, I was just tidying up, she said. Her tone was soft, but her eyes didn't match. That night, I locked the cedar chest where Robert's papers were kept and slid the small brass key onto a ribbon around my neck. I had the sense that I might need to defend more than my pride. If you've ever been told you don't belong in a place you helped build, you'll know the silence that follows. It isn't empty, it's gathering. I didn't yet know what I was gathering for, only that truth had to start somewhere solid. For me, it started with a notebook and the decision not to leave my own home of the heart so easily. It began quietly, the way storms always do when they're still pretending to be weather. A letter from the bank didn't arrive. A grocery delivery I'd paid for was marked unconfirmed. Small things, again, but I kept noticing them. One morning, I found a new envelope addressed only to Mr. and Mrs. Paul Keene. My name had always been included on household correspondence because I co-signed when we opened the shared account. I waited until the next day, thinking maybe it was a printing error. Then, when the second letter came with the same omission, I went to the bank myself. The branch manager, a neat young woman named Sarah Connell, greeted me with that professional smile people give to widows. I explained that I only wanted to confirm my information on the joint account. She typed quickly, glanced at the screen, then hesitated. Mrs. Keene, she said softly, your name isn't listed as an active holder on this account. I remember feeling the same way I had when I first held Robert's death certificate, something official removing you from what once defined your life. I asked her to print a copy of the change form, and she did. The paper showed a signature next to a date 2 weeks earlier. The signature looked like mine, but it wasn't. The E in Dorothy curved wrong, too high. I folded the sheet carefully and slid it into my notebook. Thank you, I said, keeping my voice level. You've been very kind. That was the first truth prop, the bank file copy. I placed it inside a plastic sleeve and marked the corner with a small red dot. That evening, when Vanessa asked how my day was, I smiled and said, productive. She smiled back, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. Over the next week, more changes appeared. My favorite photograph of Robert, the one on the counter beside the fruit bowl, disappeared. When I asked about it, Vanessa said, "Oh, Ethan knocked it over." The frame broke. I found the frame later, unbroken, inside a drawer in the laundry room. I added another note to my notebook: date, time, observation. I didn't know exactly what I was building, only that truth needed documentation before it could become defense. I began visiting small places during my morning walks: the post office, the county clerk's office, even the public library where I'd once worked. At each stop, I confirmed records quietly: property tax notices, address changes, account authorizations. Every time, I felt like I was tracing invisible fingerprints, and every time, the lines led back to Vanessa. When I confronted Paul gently about it one evening, he looked tired. "Mom, Vanessa just wants to streamline things," he said. "You don't have to worry about paperwork." His tone was loving but dismissive, like I was an old woman confusing forms and feelings. I didn't argue. I just said, "You're right, dear. I don't have to worry. I only have to understand. One afternoon, I noticed Vanessa standing by the cedar chest in my room. She jumped when she saw me. I was looking for wrapping paper, she said quickly. I nodded, pretending to believe her, then locked the chest again when she left. That was when I decided I needed help, not to fight, but to confirm. I called my old neighbor, Lena Whitmore, a retired notary with a mind like a filing cabinet. Bring your notebook, she said, and that paper from the bank. We'll start from there. The next morning, I walked to her house carrying my leather satchel. Lena's kitchen smelled of coffee and lemon polish. She read the documents, eyes narrowing. Dorothy, this signature isn't yours. Whoever did this forgot to match your loop height. She tapped the "Ra" in my name. You always close it tight. Her calm precision made me feel less alone. We copied everything and stored one set in her desk. You need to check Robert's will, she said. Remember, his instructions about the house were specific. That night, back home, I couldn't sleep. The house was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator. I opened my notebook and turned to a clean page. At the top, I wrote a single line. When truth hides in politeness, it rots. Then I began listing everything I knew: the missing mail, the altered account, the hidden photo, the forged signature. Each fact steadied me like a step on solid ground. By the end of that week, I had 2 proof items and a new kind of silence. It wasn't the silence of fear anymore. It was the silence of a plan beginning to take shape. I still smiled, still helped with dinner, still kissed Ethan goodnight, but every action now carried intention. I was no longer waiting to be treated kindly. I was gathering truth like currency, preparing to spend it only when it would matter most. Lena Whitmore was the kind of friend every woman hopes to have once in her life: steady, unhurried, and allergic to nonsense. She lived 2 streets over, in a narrow brick house that smelled faintly of cinnamon and old paper. When she opened the door, she didn't ask what was wrong. She just said, "Sit down, Dorothy." I made coffee. Her tone reminded me of the way Robert used to say, "Let's think before we talk." I told her everything: the missing mail, the new tone in Vanessa's voice, the forged signature. She listened without interruption, tapping her pen against a small yellow notepad. When I finished, she said, "You're not imagining this. It's a pattern. First control the money, then the message, then the space." Her words were sharp, but her face stayed gentle. "You said the will was in the cedar chest?" she asked. I nodded. "Then that's our next step." That afternoon, we went to the bank together to open the safe deposit box where Robert and I had stored copies of our documents. The clerk recognized me and smiled. "It's been a while, Mrs. Keene," he said. The box was cold to the touch when he set it on the table. Inside were 3 envelopes: insurance, pension, and one labeled Will, 2017. I slid the paper out and spread it carefully. The words felt like Robert's voice reaching through time. The will stated that the house was to remain in my name for the duration of my life. Upon my passing, ownership would transfer to Paul. Vanessa's name appeared nowhere. Lena pointed at the line with her pen. "That means she has no legal claim to the property while you're alive," she said. "So if she's pushing you out, it's not from law, it's from audacity." I smiled despite myself. Robert always said she had confidence to spare. We made certified copies of the will and notarized the date of retrieval. Lena sealed one copy in an envelope and said, "Keep this at my house. We'll call it Insurance of Friendship." Her matter-of-fact tone made me feel something I hadn't in weeks safe. That evening, back home, I found Vanessa in the kitchen on her laptop. She looked up briefly. "Where have you been?" she asked. I told her, "Running an errand with a friend." She smiled without warmth. "You have friends your age who still drive?" I just said, "Some of us remember the rules of the road." Her laugh was short and brittle. Later, in my room, I placed the original will inside the cedar chest again, this time wrapping it in a towel beneath my folded sweaters. It wasn't hiding, it was protecting. I could almost hear Robert's voice saying, "You've got this, Dot. You always did know how to organize a defense." A few days later, Lena called. "I spoke to a legal aide at the courthouse," she said. "If you ever need to verify your ownership, bring that will and your property tax statement. They'll confirm it in 10 minutes. Her calm precision steadied me again. That night, while reading to Ethan, he asked, "Grandma, are you sad?" I smiled and said, "No, sweetheart, I'm learning something new." He grinned. "Grandma school?" I laughed softly. "Something like that." I knew then that my next step wasn't just about protecting documents. It was about teaching myself that calm isn't weakness, it's strategy. Vanessa didn't know that I now had facts, allies, and proof. She still believed I was only polite. But politeness, when used right, is the sharpest tool there is. The weeks that followed tested every quiet bone in my body. Vanessa grew bolder, speaking to me as if I were staff instead of family. It started with remarks so small you could almost mistake them for jokes. Maybe you should rest more, Dorothy. You've had your time running things. Then came suggestions. We're thinking of turning your room into Ethan's play area once you move back to your place. I'd nod, let the words pass like wind, but I always wrote them down. My notebook grew thick, 12 entries of remarks, dates, and behaviors that mapped a slow tightening of control. By late February, new furniture began arriving, sleek, modern pieces that didn't belong to our history. The family photos came down one by one, replaced by art Vanessa said matched the new tone of the house. Paul barely noticed, worn down by double shifts. When he did come home, Vanessa would meet him at the door, kiss his cheek, and whisper something before I even had the chance to say hello. I could feel her rewriting the house, one conversation at a time. Then came the big order: a king-sized bed, a sectional sofa, and a note on the delivery slip that read, "Address update pending." When I asked Vanessa about it, she said, "Oh, that's just a system thing. We'll have everything sorted by spring." Her tone was rehearsed, careless on purpose, but spring stuck with me. It felt like a deadline she wasn't saying out loud. Meanwhile, I kept my mornings busy. I walked, tended the small flower bed by the mailbox, and met Lena twice a week for coffee. Each time, Lena reminded me, document, don't debate. It became my mantra. I logged 12 incidents, 5 receipts, and every interaction with Vanessa. By mid-March, I had a binder labeled Household Affairs, filled with evidence, not emotion. Vanessa must have sensed my stillness because she started testing boundaries differently. She canceled my grocery deliveries, saying she'd handle finances directly. She moved my sewing kit into the garage. Once, I caught her taking photos of the living room. "Just updating the home inventory," she said. I knew better. Photos are often used for insurance or sale listings. The real shift came when she asked Paul to open a new checking account for joint expenses. When he mentioned it at dinner, I smiled and said, "Just make sure the paperwork reflects everyone correctly." Vanessa's fork paused mid-air. "Of course," she said too quickly. That night, I placed 3 documents side by side on my desk: the will, the forged bank form, and the property tax statement. Each piece was a thread. Together, they formed a net. I wasn't sure yet what I'd catch with it, truth or confession, but it was ready. In early April, Vanessa's words grew sharper. "We need more space," she said one morning while pouring coffee. "Maybe by spring we can help you settle somewhere quieter." I looked at her, calm as still water. "Spring," I repeated. "That's soon." She smiled, like victory was already hers. "We'll make the transition smooth." That night, I called Lena. "It's coming," I said. She replied, "Then be ready. Keep copies, keep calm." The next day, I visited the bank again and spoke to the manager privately. I showed her the notarized will and the questionable form. She leaned forward and whispered, "This was absolutely not authorized. I'll note it on record and flag the account for security." She handed me a stamped confirmation page, another quiet victory sealed in ink. I thanked her and tucked it into my binder. When I got home, Vanessa was standing in the kitchen with a paint catalog. "Thinking of painting the living room," she said. "Paul wants a fresh start." I smiled. Fresh starts are good when everyone agrees. She didn't answer. By May, I had every piece of my life reduced to paper and truth. Each night, I reviewed it like a prayer, dates, signatures, the rhythm of wrong things piling up. And then, one Friday evening, as she walked past me with that same bright smile, I realized something. She believed she was winning because I stayed polite. She didn't understand that calm isn't surrender. It's strategy. When Paul left for a work conference that weekend, Vanessa announced she was hosting her sister. "We'll need the house to ourselves for a few days," she said. I smiled. "Of course, I'll stay at Lena's." She looked surprised but pleased, thinking I was retreating. That night, I packed her suitcase instead of mine. Not as punishment, but as punctuation, the closing mark on her assumption that silence meant weakness. I placed the binder of documents on my desk, the photo of Robert beside it, and whispered, "I'm ready." The next morning would bring confrontation, but I'd decided it wouldn't be loud. It would be factual, final, and full of grace. It was Saturday morning, the kind of morning when light filters through the curtains like forgiveness. I woke early, dressed in a pale blue blouse Robert always said brought calm into a room, and brewed coffee strong enough to hold my hands steady. Paul had left for his conference the night before, and the house was quiet, except for the distant hum of the dishwasher. Vanessa came downstairs in her robe, yawning, unaware that the day she had built on false confidence was about to shift under her feet. "Good morning," I said, setting a mug in front of her. She blinked, surprised by my cheer. "Coffee? You're up early," I smiled. "Some mornings call for clarity." She sat, half listening, scrolling through her phone. I let the silence stretch, just long enough for her to look up. "Vanessa," I said softly, "you told me something once that's been echoing in this house ever since." She frowned, unsure. "You said I was just a guest here." Her expression flickered, a quick shadow of guilt, but pride returned fast. "I didn't mean it harshly. I just think we need boundaries." "Of course," I said. "Boundaries are important." I reached for the folder beside me, the one holding my bank forms, will copies, and tax statements. I laid them out slowly on the table, paper sliding against paper like truth against pretense. I wanted to be sure the boundaries were fair, so I did a little checking. At the bank, at the clerk's office, and in Robert's will. She stiffened. "You went through our finances?" "Our finances?" I repeated, keeping my tone even. "The household account was originally under my and Paul's names. 2 weeks ago, someone forged my signature to remove me. That's illegal, Vanessa." Her mouth opened, but no sound came. I didn't press. I simply turned the will around so she could read it. "And this," I said, "states that this home remains in my name until my death. After that, it belongs to Paul. You'll notice your name isn't listed." She stood abruptly. "You're trying to humiliate me." "No," I said. "I'm trying to clarify who the guest actually is." I rose, walked to the corner, and lifted the small suitcase I had packed the night before. It was hers. Her clothes folded neatly, her perfume wrapped in tissue, her heels paired in order. I placed it beside her chair. "Guests don't own the home," I said gently. "They visit." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The clock ticked once, twice, then she whispered, "You can't just throw me out." "I'm not throwing you out," I said. "I'm asking you to step back before you break something that can't be fixed. I've spoken to an attorney and to the bank. Everything is recorded. Paul will understand when he returns. But I would rather we part with dignity than with police reports." Her face shifted from anger to disbelief. "You're bluffing." I slid the bank copy toward her. "This is the form." The manager confirmed it was forged. I met her eyes and spoke softly, the way a teacher might to a child who's gone too far. "You're smart, Vanessa. You don't need to become cruel to feel strong." For a long moment, she just stood there, breathing unevenly. Then her eyes filled not with tears of remorse, but with the sting of being seen too clearly. She reached for the suitcase, half in shock. "I'll stay with my sister," she said finally. "That would be best," I said, "for all of us." I didn't gloat. I didn't raise my voice. I simply handed her the photo she had hidden weeks ago, the one of Robert. "He would have forgiven you too," I said quietly. "But forgiveness doesn't mean surrender." She took the photo, stared at it for a moment, then placed it back on the counter. "You're colder than I thought," she muttered. "No," I said, just clearer. When the door closed behind her, the silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was clean, like air after rain. I sat at the table, folded the documents back into their folder, and felt something deep inside me settle. It wasn't victory. It was balance returning. Paul called that evening. "Mom, everything okay?" "Yes," I said, "just a little house cleaning." If you've ever faced someone who mistook your grace for weakness, you'll know that silence can be louder than anger. That morning, I didn't just reclaim my home, I reclaimed the right to be heard without shouting. The following week felt strangely quiet, as if the house itself were trying to understand what had changed. Vanessa had left early that morning, suitcase in hand, her perfume fading slowly from the hallway. I didn't celebrate. I made tea, fed Ethan his cereal, and sat by the window while sunlight reached across the kitchen table. It was over, but only in one sense. When Paul came home that night, I told him everything. I showed him the documents, the forged bank file, the notarized will, and the confirmation from the branch manager. He read in silence, his face heavy with disbelief that slipped slowly into shame. "She did all this?" he whispered. "I didn't want to see it," I said. "Love can make people blind, but not immune to truth." He pressed his palms to his face and sighed. "I'll talk to her," he said. "But first, I'll make things right here." Over the next few days, he did exactly that. He contacted the bank, closed the compromised account, and opened a new one in both our names. He called the family attorney and verified my ownership of the house. "It's all legal," he said, handing me a stack of stamped copies. I felt the tension I'd carried for months begin to loosen, not in triumph, but in relief. Vanessa called a week later, Her voice was brittle. I just wanted to say I'll be staying with my sister for a while, she said. I need space to think, I told her. That's wise. Then I added, if you'd like to collect the rest of your things, I'll leave them by the door. No need for a scene. There was a long pause before she said, You're not as gentle as you look. I smiled, though she couldn't see it. Gentle isn't the same as naive. Paul tried to repair the bridge carefully. He visited her once, brought Ethan along, and returned quiet. She says she's sorry, he told me. But she's not ready to come back, I nodded. Then she's halfway there. Apologies, I've learned, take longer than words. Life found a new rhythm. I started tending the magnolia tree again, pruning its branches and planting lavender beneath. Ethan helped, his small hands careful with the soil. Grandma, he said one morning, did you and Mommy have a fight? I looked at him and said, No, sweetheart, we had a lesson. He nodded, like he understood more than he should. To make sure this wouldn't happen again, I called the property manager Lena recommended. A quiet man named Harold Connors came by, reviewed the home records, and said, You've done everything right, Mrs. Keene. We'll set up a protective title note and notify the county. I thanked him, and he smiled. You'd be surprised how many people don't think to keep copies. I thought of the binder on my shelf and said, I'm not surprised anymore. That spring, I updated my will. I kept Paul as beneficiary but added a condition. No co-ownership changes without my notarized consent. It wasn't distrust, it was clarity. Lena signed as witness, proud as if we'd won a quiet case in court. You taught that girl a lifetime's worth of manners, she said, even if she doesn't know it yet. In time, peace returned, but not the same peace as before. This one was quieter, older, wiser. I still made coffee at dawn, still sat by the window, but now the air around me felt owned again, not by law, but by truth. If you've ever been pushed to the edge of your own kindness, you'll understand this. Strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's a woman folding papers neatly, labeling folders, and saying, This ends here. 6 months later, summer settled gently over Raleigh. The magnolia tree was in full bloom again, its petals spreading wide like open palms. I spent my mornings trimming the garden, while Ethan played with his toy cars in the driveway. The house felt lighter, as if it had exhaled after holding its breath too long. Paul still worked long hours, but he came home earlier now, cooking simple dinners with me the way Robert and I used to. Sometimes, we ate in comfortable silence, the kind that means everything is understood. One afternoon, a letter arrived in handwriting I recognized. Instantly, Vanessa. The envelope was cream-colored, the kind you buy when you want to look sincere. I opened it carefully. She thanked me for not making things worse, for handling everything with grace I didn't deserve. She said she was in therapy, staying near her sister, trying to be a better mother to Ethan. At the bottom, she wrote, Thank you for keeping the door open. I placed the letter in my notebook beside the old entries, the 12 incidents, the bank file, the will copy. Not as evidence this time, but as closure. Forgiveness, I've learned, isn't letting someone back in. It's letting yourself move forward without bitterness. Now, every evening, Ethan and I sit on the porch swing. He tells me about school, about his favorite teacher, about the frog he wants to keep as a pet. The same swing creaks softly under our weight, carrying the sound of peace. I look at him and see the future bright, curious, free. That's all I ever wanted to protect. If you've ever been told you're just a guest in your own story, remember this. Ownership begins when you decide your worth isn't negotiable. Thank you for listening. Share your story in the comments. Have you ever had to reclaim your peace without raising your voice? And don't forget to subscribe to Her Voices. Your voice matters.